As you probably have observed on the website, because I talk about custom templates somewhat, custom templates in Thesis are quite a bit different than custom templates elsewhere in WordPress. In WordPress has a complex method of determining what template should be used under what context. And when you enable pretty permalinks, that makes the process of selecting a template iterative. So it's got to ask one question and run through that question, and it's got to ask another question and run through that question. The consequence of which is there's an awful lot of overhead associated with choosing which template to display. And so when Chris wrote Thesis, he realized that he could create a system whereby WordPress does not need to go through that decision-making process. And so he completely skips it altogether. There's really only one template that is used. It's got a couple of helper templates, but they essentially do nothing. The one template is index.php, and index.php does all of the work for every individual version of the template, which is not the case with most WordPress themes and is not the standard practice in WordPress. And so the way he does that, or the way Thesis does that, is that what it does is every single instance, every single thing that's displayed, whether or not it's a single post, a page, an archive, a 404 page, there is no content on this page, every single version of a page that WordPress writes follows this pattern in Thesis. It creates the header, and the header has a bunch of stuff that it does. It creates the head section of the HTML page. It creates the opening body tag. It assigns a custom class to the body. It adds Thesis hooks. It adds the header, the Thesis default header, and it adds the hook after header, and I think it adds the menu. And so all that stuff happens inside of header, and then you get to the content. And that's where the meat of all of it is, which starts off with Thesis hook before content and ends with Thesis hook after content. And then after that content comes the footer, which starts with Thesis hook before footer and then has whatever footer content there is, and then Thesis hook after footer, and then Thesis hook after HTML, and then the closing body tag. So in a traditional template, the header, whatever happens in the content, and the footer are defined in each template in one way or another. In the Thesis system, header and footer are defined once and for all. They can be modified, but they are defined once and for all. And then content is the stuff that gets changed. And so when you get to content, or when Thesis begins to write content, that's when the template-like decisions get made. When in WordPress, the template decisions are made outside of the boundary of this process right here. So before anything ever begins to render, WordPress is out here trying to figure out what template to use. Well, what Thesis does is it draws the decision into this section of the site and uses the same template for everything, but varies what happens inside this content based on decisions made here. And this is template-like decision-making because it's not actual template decision-making, because this is already after the template has been decided. But the first question that Thesis asks is this a page? And if it is a page, then it goes off to its standard kinds of behavior for pages. If it's not a page, it goes to home. Is it a home page? If it's not a home page, then it asks, is it a single post? If it's not a single post, then it asks, is it a category or tag archive page? If it's not a category or tag archive page, then it wants to know if it's some other kind of archive. And it just goes through that question list. including, is there any content to display at all, or is there a 404 error? It asks all of those questions, and depending upon the answer to those questions, it behaves a certain way. Well, the only behavior we really care about is this question of what does it do if it's a page. So I'm not going to talk very much about the rest of these decisions. But if it's a page, then it asks, okay, well, if it's a page, is it a custom page? Well, if it's not a custom page, then it asks the question, is it no sidebars? Did you pick the no sidebars template? And if that answer is yes, then it displays only the content column. If the answer is no, then it displays default page behavior, which means it's content column and the sidebars. So to help you get a sense of this, I'm going to come back over here to my site, and we're going to look at a page. And then let's see, let's just look at our live answers page. Now, under live answers, under the template, it's a custom template. My live answers displays a custom template. And it displays a custom template that displays custom post types. And those custom post types are live answer post types. So it's a custom template, but it could be either the default template, the no sidebars template, or the custom template. Now, archives is a whole different thing altogether. I'm just leaving it out of this conversation. You'd only have one page that was ever an archives page, and it essentially lists everything on your site in a list. But that's not, so it's completely apart from this conversation. But this page uses the custom template, and so in this decision matrix, it asks, is it a custom template? Yes, so then it goes off into my custom processing. And if it said no, it's a no sidebars page, then it would go do the no sidebars processing. But if it's not custom and it's not no sidebars, then it's default. And if it's the default template, then it does this default behavior. And this default behavior is set up in design options. So if you look at your Thesis design options, that default behavior really comes down to how many columns and what column order. There's a slight complication with also which framework are you using, but that is sort of a slight complication. But it does come down to those three things. Those are the three elements of this default behavior: your number of columns, your column order, and your framework, that decide what this default behavior is. And this default behavior actually is translated onto every one of these other choices. And so if it's the home page, it's the default behavior plus the home style content. If it's a single post, then it's the default behavior, and the content column shows single post content. If it's a category page, then it's the default behavior. The content in the category page is category archive content, and so on and so forth. So this default behavior gets replicated in each one of these other choices as well. But in this case, if it's not a custom template and it's a no sidebars template, then it comes down to this default behavior. Now, in order to sort of understand what that default behavior looks like, I have another diagram on my site. Go to video lessons. Let's see, custom templates. Then this visual diagram of the Thesis custom template area. Okay, so I have this illustration here which shows, the different parts of the Thesis page. And so here's that header and everything associated with the header, including its hooks and everything else. And then when you select custom template, what it does is it places this hook in the middle of the template, Thesis hook custom template, and then cuts out all of the other content until footer. Well, this is what the content would ordinarily look like if it wasn't cut out. It starts off with Thesis columns, which has both the thesis content column and thesis sidebars inside of it. And then the thesis content column has a thesis hook before content, and then thesis hook before post box, and then thesis hook post box top. And then you end up with a thesis page loop, which essentially does what's inside the page, including headline area and then the content. And then it has the thesis hook post box bottom, and then thesis hook after post box, and then thesis hook after content. This is the sort of the default layout of a standard 2-column page. And so if you're going to replicate any part of the original thesis HTML, then you may insert thesis sidebars, or you may insert thesis content column inside of your custom template. And you would do that right here, whatever parts of it you want.